estimates, not opposition estimates. Senator Roberts.
Thank you, Chair. Even though the boats have been stopped, and I congratulate you again and congratulate the government again for doing this, isn't the tide of Muslim immigration into Australia still continuing legally through regular immigration channels?
Senator, we'd like to be very precise in our handling of terms within the public service. When you say the tide of Muslim immigration, I'm sorry, you might just assist me with the point of the question.
Isn't Muslim immigration into Australia still continuing legally through regular immigration channels?
Well, our immigration program is non-discriminatory. It doesn't discriminate us between race or religion or creed.
Thank you. How many Muslims have been allowed to migrate to Australia since the boats were stopped 3 years ago?
I'll ask my colleagues if we actually retain or if we slice information in that way. We look at applications for permanent migration, which I think your question is going to, permanent migration on their merits, and we do so in a non-discriminatory fashion. But Mr Wilden's Head of Immigration Policy, perhaps he's got the answer on the tip of his fingers.
So we don't ask for religion unless it is potentially through a refugee claimant, because it may be pertinent to the nature of their protection claim. If you were coming here as a skilled migrant, the questions we ask go to your character, health, age, occupation. Religion is not one of the questions we ask when someone's coming here on a skilled or a family visa.
So given the growing threat of Islamic terrorism and the high correlation between Islam and crime, don't you have a responsibility to Australians to know this in order to protect us?
Senator, perhaps you might have been preparing to ask a question when I was giving my answer earlier on visa risk assessment. Our visa risk assessment capabilities are applicable to all visa applicants of any race, creed, religion, sexual orientation and so on and so forth. The risk assessment attaches to the person. If the person who's making the application in the permanent program has tendencies in the direction that you have described, there is reason to believe that they might be associated with Islamist terrorism or the like, then they won't get a visa.
There are other factors apart from terrorism, because isn't it true that while Muslims make up less than 3% of the population in Australia, they make up around 10% of the prison population in New South Wales and Victoria? Isn't the percentage of Muslims of working age on welfare around 60% for many groups? Isn't it over 90% for Afghan illegal immigrants allowed in by the incompetent Rudd and Gillard governments? And of course, isn't it true that all convicted terrorists in Australia in recent years have been Muslims?
I don't have any statistics to hand that would be pertinent to answering that question, and I wouldn't normally have in my head the composition of the prison population of New South Wales. As I said, Senator, and I understand the import of your question, we risk assess everyone who makes an application to come to our country, and we protect our borders universally.
If there is a strong correlation, and it seems there is, between one particular immigrant group and social problems, why would we keep letting them into the country?
Well, Senator, when you say letting them in to the country, sorry, I just... I want to stress and give you a reassurance that a risk assessment is attached to every single applicant, whether they're a refugee, humanitarian entrant, a permanent applicant in either our skilled or family programs and so on and so forth. And we apply risk assessment tools and techniques with forensic and increasingly ferocious precision in relation to everyone on the face of the planet. I've got a solemn responsibility as the Secretary of this department, answerable to the Minister and through the Minister to the government at large, to ensure that we manage and mitigate and reduce all forms of risk. And frankly, it would be sending me down a rabbit burrow, an Alice in Wonderland rabbit burrow, to act on the sorts of information that you might come across in certain parts of the internet, Senator. My job is to take facts as I find them.
Senator Roberts lives.
Sorry, Senator. So my job is to assess risk objectively, universally and without fear or favour.
Well, I'll take no regard of the implication that the internet makes. That's yours to make.
Well, you should ignore many things that are on the internet, Senator, I can assure you.
Well, I agree with you.
Good, thank you.
But I
Especially Senator
don't agree with
Roberts'
your statement that implies I get my information off the internet.
I don't know where you get your information.
Right. So that is the point. You don't know. Isn't it true
you know?
that in 2015, former Prime Minister Abbott...
Could you leave and let the Senator ask his questions in silence, as people
Maybe if I
do
got to
when
ask
you
a
do?
question, I'd be a bit more quiet.
Yeah, well, you should have been here earlier then.
Been
Isn't
here
it-
for a while. Been
isn't
here
it-
longer than Senator Roberts.
Isn't it true that in 2015, former Prime Minister Abbott announced that Australia would take 12,000 members of persecuted groups from Syria? At the time, specifically Christians, Jews and Yazidis were cited. Obviously, what makes someone persecuted by a religious dictatorship is their religious affiliation. So how is it that we could identify these groups if the religion of would-be immigrants was not considered?
As Mr Walden said explicitly in his initial answer to your question, where it is relevant to the question of the assessment, for instance, of a claim of persecution, religion is a factor in terms of the Syrian and Iraq program. Persecution based on faith is in fact a material factor, and so of course that information is assessed as part of the application.
So if we're not considering religion now, then there must have been a policy change. Because
Sorry, Senator, as I said, Mr Walden made it very clear that in certain categories, ongoing, no change of policy, e.g. refugee applications, if the risk of persecution relates to your faith, whether it was 2015, 2016 or now 2017, we do look at religious affiliation because it's pertinent to the claim of persecution or the fear of persecution that's leading the person to seek protection. So there's no change of policy, no.
So apart from the fact that it would seem to be impossible to identify who is persecuted in Syria without knowing their religion, and I accept what you just said,
Thank you.
if you let in 12,000 supposed refugees from an overwhelmingly Muslim country like Syria without considering their religion, then just on a statistical basis, those you let in will be overwhelmingly Muslim, won't they? So this means that close to another 12,000 Muslims will be let into Australia under this government.
Senator Roberts, 2 points. One, we haven't let in any supposed refugees. We've only let in people who've been determined to be refugees through that program. That's point one. Point two, as the Minister has said in his public utterances and as I've given evidence, not in fact today, we seem to have skipped that topic today, but in previous estimates, because of our focus on persecuted minorities, which was the policy intent that Mr Abbott announced at the time of the policy that you articulated, we have very much focused on persecuted minorities coming out of Syria and Iraq, and they have tended to be overwhelmingly non-Muslims as a function of the fact that they were the most vulnerable and at-risk populations. And
So-
I think Mr Manthorpe and others have given evidence in previous estimates about the proportionality of the program. It's somewhere in the order of 85+%, is it not?
The large majority are in the persecuted minority groups of a very wide variety of faiths, Senator.
So when it comes to Muslims specifically, they of course, like other people, will bring in their relatives, have many children each, and in the blink of an eye turn 12,000 into 100,000 more or more Muslims, won't we?
But I think we've just told you, Senator, that there aren't 12,000.
So let's go back to the claim then that you supposedly have no idea how many Muslims are immigrating here, and I accept that.
That wasn't a claim we made.
So how many Muslims are immigrating here?
Well, perhaps we were a little bit too forensic in our evidence. Through the census and through the work done by the Bureau of Statistics, as you yourself intimated, I think, in terms of the proportionality, of course, we and the Bureau of Stats and other agencies of government know how many people identify through statistical methods as being of the Muslim faith, as we do of other faiths. In terms of the management of the migration program, where it is directly pertinent to your application for migration to Australia, or in the case of refugees, for your claim for protection, of course we look at your religion, because that's in that case, the very nature of your claim for protection. Otherwise, it would only be a material factor in our non-discriminatory immigration program if it gave rise to a question of risk, and then that would be then dealt with in the following way. Is the risk that this person poses to our community, either health grounds, character grounds or security grounds, such that a denial of the visa is warranted? And that could be for any range of matters. It could be association with criminality. It could be association with terrorism or radical extremism tending to terrorism. It could be for any other reasons. And we do that risk assessment, as I said at the very start of my answer, in a way that attaches itself to the person.
So could you just clarify then for me, do you know the religion of people who come in here and if they're not a persecuted group?
In the refugee program?
In any program?
Well, if they're a member of a persecuted group, we'd know because we've let them in under the refugee program. So in 100% of cases...
If they're persecuted for a specific religion?
That's right. If people have been persecuted for a religious reason, and it might be that they are Christians, it might be that they are Buddhists, it might be that they are of some other faith, we would know in 100% of cases the circumstances where we've given protection to someone for reasons of religious persecution, yes.
So, and also if you know the country of origin of an immigrant and the percentage of each religion in that country, then a simple parametric model will allow you to estimate how many Muslims we're allowing to immigrate, won't it?
No.
Mr Mantle?
Sorry, I'm just familiar with this debate in another context. Not necessarily because you can't presume that the proportion of, let's take a country, well, no, I won't take any country, but there might be a country with a 50-50 split of one religion and another, but that doesn't mean that immigrants from that country who choose to come to live in Australia come in that proportion, nor does it mean that we will necessarily bring them in that proportion. So you just can't make a one-for-one connection between those
Because some groups
things.
may have more pressure than others.
That's right.
Okay,
and
I
for all
accept
sorts
that.
of other factors.
So, given that the quality of immigration, not just the quantity, and by quality I hasten to add that I would define it as the willingness and ability to assimilate and integrate. So the willingness and ability to assimilate and integrate. Isn't quality important when it comes to maintaining our Australian culture and laws?
Well, certainly confidence in the immigration program itself is a public asset in its own right. People have to have confidence that the immigration program's being managed with an eye to multiple objectives, some of which go to prosperity and social cohesion, others that go to national security, public health and the like. And it's the job of my department and the officers in my department to ensure that all those imperatives and objectives are met. And social cohesion is certainly one of the factors that we use to frame our decision-making about risk, absolutely.
So en masse, overall, you do include social cohesion, the willingness and ability to assimilate and integrate?
The ability of a person to settle here, the ability of a person to find a job, the ability of a person to either have English language or to acquire it in a reasonably expeditious fashion are certainly factors that can be taken into account. In terms of the harm that might be presented to our community, which is part of your earlier line of questioning and perhaps implied in your latter line of questioning, that harm relates to the risks posed by the migrant themselves, and so the risk assessment attaches itself to the individual applicant.
Is there not a factor to do with when people of a certain culture get together within our culture and that disturbs their ability and willingness to integrate and assimilate?
Does that influence individual decisions, Senator?
Does it perhaps say the number of people from a specific area or even Muslim immigration needs to be assessed?
We have a non-discriminatory policy program, and under law we're required to make visa decisions, permanent, temporary, but for the sake of this discussion, it's really, I'm sure you're going to permanent migration. We're required under law to make those decisions in a non-discriminatory fashion, and the policy, which has stood for some decades now under both sides of politics, is to run the program in a non-discriminatory fashion.
So, given that terrorists don't discriminate, is that a valid response, do you think? Well, perhaps I'm going to policy, so I'll let you off the hook. I won't ask that question. So perhaps...
Well, I can give you this assurance. I won't give a political response or a policy response that's properly for the Minister. If there's any suggestion, and Mr Dutton's made this clear, his predecessor, Mr Morrison, made it clear, and numerous ministers have made it clear, The benefit of the doubt in risk assessments that attach to an individual is the benefit of the doubt. I must say we cast a very wary eye on any, and I said earlier, we look for watch lists. We look in the increasingly predictive fashion using our predictive analytics models. We look at any potential risk for harm to the community, of which obviously terrorism is very high on the agenda, and we have a benefit of the doubt in favour of protecting our community. Absolutely. So we will reject an application if that person does not meet not only health and character checks, but security checks, absolutely.
Okay, I get that, and you've emphasised that point many times, and I get it that the individual is assessed for the risk. Isn't there a possibility, a greater possibility of certain groups arriving here, passing the individual screening genuinely, and coming here, and because of their background or their cultural identity when they arrive here, they are more likely to join welfare, more likely to commit crime, more likely to advocate terrorism or hate preaching?
Well, if those factors are relevant in a way that attaches itself to individual behaviour, our risk assessment systems are geared to detect those behaviours. So I'm sorry, we're being circular, and I do apologise, Senator, if my answers are sounding rather circular. But we look at a multiplicity of factors: character, health, security. There are various income thresholds, for instance, that go to the question of welfare dependence. Mr Wilder can wax much more lyrically and eloquently on that than I can. We look at criminal associations. We look at specific information that might come to light of a derogatory nature that attaches itself either to the individual. We also look at the models that I referred to earlier, referring to, I can't remember now, Senator Fawcett, I think, my apologies if I've mistaken. We looked at our predictive models, increasingly so in terms of identifying risk. We have a multiplicity of tools that give us very forensic and very detailed information in many cases that allow a decision maker to make a legally safe decision that, as I said, has a bias towards the protection of the Australian community.
Okay,
Senator,
last question, thanks,
Okay.
Senator McDonald. So you assess the applicants individually before they come in. Do you assess the data on crime, welfare and social cohesion of the product you allow through your process, the outcome of your process? And if possible, I'll put this on notice, could you get back to me with your assessment of how many Muslims have come into the country since you stopped the boats in 2013, and whether or not you do check on their ability and willingness once they have settled in Australia to assimilate and integrate?
To the extent that the ABS relevant data set can help us in that regard, I'm happy to take that on notice. Given what I said earlier, and I refer to my earlier evidence, I just don't know that we're going to be able to provide you with anything other than a statistically based answer, but I suspect that's what you're looking for anyway, so we will look at the data.
I'd like some assessment of the quality of the integration and assimilation of people who you authorised to come into this country as permanent residents.
Well, that's a different question. I might need to take some advice on this. The settlement and integration question is one properly directed to our colleagues in the Department of Social Services, as they provide settlement services, language proficiency, employment and housing support. So, Senator, I think what we might best do is take both questions on notice. We will take on notice, working with our colleagues in the Bureau of Statistics, an attempt at providing you with a statistical answer to the first part of your question. The second part of your question, as I heard it, related to the quality of the, I think you said, assimilation outcomes.
Well, the quality of the outcome as defined by the willingness and ability to assimilate and integrate.
Senator
I've got...
Roberts, you said one more question. You've had
Well,
about five
need to
others.
take that on notice.
And,
Thank you.
And that was the answer which I thought you gave 5 minutes ago, Mr Pezzullo, but then you elaborated.
Thank you,
on
Chair.
it.
Thank you.